Welcome to the Macke Makerspace. Hi, I'm Brother Bob Macke, and welcome to the Macke Makerspace. We spent the past few episodes working on the observatory on a church. This is the Church of St. Ignatius of Loyola in Rome, where in the mid-19th century, Father Angelo Secchi built an observatory on the roof. We are so close to being done with this project, and I am really excited to get started. I hope you are too. First, a bit of unfinished business. Now that the exterior of the church is painted, I want to clean up the side buildings, as well as cover over some stray bits of paint here and there, so everything that isn't the church gets a uniform layer of medium gray, including the sides of the base. I also wanted to give the piazza in front of the church a decent paint job. I started with a base layer of the same gray as the odd walls I just painted. And then I stippled on some black to kind of resemble the San Pietrini cobblestones that paved the ground there, but I didn't like the result. So off camera, I added black pigment powder. Last time we painted the copper domes over the side altars, but neglected the apse dome. The roof there is laid out in a series of plates, so I'll start by putting down a layer of clay into which I can etch lines to simulate them. The paint treatment is similar to the copper domes, with a base of medium gray, followed by light gray, and blotchy zinc green. But for the pale blue layer, I'm trying to paint each plate differently. A whitewash blends it together, but I should have watered down the white paint a bit more. It blended the colors a bit too much. Oh well. It still looks pretty good on the model. And now for the telescope housings. The interior walls are painted white, and the floor will get a concrete treatment. I'm starting with a layer of medium gray. The top of the tower will get the same paint job. Don't forget the steps behind the Meridian dome. Next, some light gray is stippled over the top. A bit of roof tile around the Meridian telescope housing gets painted red-orange. It'll get darkened and weathered later. The same paint is used for the terrace where the Koshua telescope will be placed. The track on which the Mertz dome rotates gets painted metallic gray. Nobody will ever see it once the dome is in place, but I couldn't just leave it unpainted. Now for the railing around the interior of the Mertz dome. The interiors aren't going to be easy to see once the domes are in place, so this doesn't have to be great, but I'll still do my best. I painted brown and then bend it into a loop. A little blast from a heat gun will help hold the new shape. You want to be careful not to overdo this or the plastic will warp. I created a jig to hold it perfectly round so that I could glue on the base of the railing and the steps. It's all upside down right now. Once the glue dries, I can take it out. And and the last step is the railing on the stairs. Let me introduce Blurry Cam as I put the railing into place. Now we can get to work on the Merz dome. I remodeled it and printed a fresh version. Even though nobody will see the interior, I'll give it a wooden brown ceiling. I have no color reference for the dome, so I'm basing the paint job on what seems reasonable. The wall is getting painted an off-white beige. And the same goes for the Koshua dome. The roof is flat white. This is typical for telescope domes to reflect sunlight and heat so as to prevent thermal gradients between the interior and exterior. Thermal gradients mean air movement that distorts telescope images. But it does get a dark wash to weather it like everything else on the church. Now for the window frames. Who says I don't do windows? They get painted white. They need panes of glass, which I'm going to simulate with clear plastic. It'll barely be visible in the final construction, but if the light catches it just right, it'll glint a little. The windows just snap into place. Back to the Blurry Cam for the placement of the dome. A few more windows need to find their homes. You've already seen me make these black plastic window panes back in the video of part 4. And there are 2 skylights over Secchi's offices. These are treated like the other windows, except I've painted them gray rather than black. Now to get to the telescopes, let's start with the Merz, and we've got to start with its plinth. This will be painted to resemble limestone. Start with a medium gray base layer. Sponge brush a limestone color over the top. The telescope itself will be made from a 2mm wooden dowel. It seems tiny, but it was actually quite large for its day. It had a 9-inch aperture and was over 14 feet long. It only seems tiny at this scale, and actually 2mm is an exaggeration of the real width. It should be closer to 1. To carve the eyepiece into this stick, I need a rudimentary lathe. My off-brand rotary tool ought to do the job. A bit of sandpaper and some patience, and there we have it. I need to wrap a few rings around the telescope onto which I will mount the counterweights. For all of this, I'm using silver jeweler's wire. If I could keep the clippers in frame, you'd see me snip the coil into tiny rings. And I'll place a couple of those rings on the telescope. They will press fit into place without any glue. The brass aperture housing is a little larger around than the rest of the telescope, so I'll make it by wrapping a little paper around the stick. I'll simulate brass by painting it brown and adding a thin layer of gold. Now for the counterweights, which are basically each a large ball on the end of a metal rod. I'll make the ball by soldering a blob on the end of a piece of wire. And I'll be sure to use the blurry cam as much as possible as I solder the counterweight to the rings on the telescope. Looks okay, but there's a bit of excess wire. That'll just snip off. As I make the rest of the assembly, let's talk about the importance of this telescope in the history of astronomy. Angelo Secchi acquired a prism which he placed on the objective aperture. With this prism, he could break starlight into its individual spectral lines. He was one of the earliest astronomers to do this and systematically studied over 4,000 stars. He distinguished 4 main spectral types that characterized most of the stars. His work became the foundation that the crew from Harvard built upon to develop the classification scheme we still use today. Unfortunately, the actual telescope no longer exists. After Rome was conquered by Italian unification in the 1870s, the telescope was confiscated and eventually ended up at the observatory in Monte Mario, where a fire in 1958 consumed it. However, the ever so important prism still exists at the observatory of Monte Porzio in Frascati. I like how the telescope looks. It isn't great, and it isn't really that close to the actual thing, but at this scale and obscured by the dome, it's just fine as it is. Now for the Meridian telescope. Meridian transit telescopes are permanently aligned along a precise north-south line. That's why the dome is at a funny angle compared to the church. These telescopes were particularly important for astrometry and timekeeping. If you already know the precise local time, then you can measure the right ascension of a star, that is, its celestial longitude, by timing when the star transits across the telescope's field of view. Conversely, if you know a star's coordinates, you can establish local sidereal time by similar observations. Today, this telescope is no longer at the Church of St. Ignatius, but at least it still exists. It can be found at the observatory at Monte Porzio in Frascati. And again, it isn't a perfect model, but it will look pretty good once placed in the dome. This dome has a flat roof with a cover that slides sideways. The flat portion of the roof gets the concrete paint treatment. The rails on which the cover slides are painted metallic gray, and the tiles for the sliding roof are given the usual tile treatment. It will be glued into place in a permanently open position so the telescope can be seen. The Koshua Refractor was a legacy of the observatory before Secchi, and he used it for solar observations. Today the dome is long gone and the telescope is at Monte Porzio. There is a walkway along the roof leading out from the observatory dome, and it has a bit of railing alongside it. And to make that, I'm laying out some silver wire on a jig. Once all the bits of wire are in place, they can be soldered together. A bit of sanding will smooth out the messy solder blobs, and the wires are trimmed to size. I am painting it a rusty color because it has sat in the elements for years. And it slides into the holes I thoughtfully planned out when I originally 3D printed this roof segment. Thank you, Past-Me! Another odd device visible in old drawings and pictures is this ball on a pole right behind the cross on the back of the facade. A close inspection of the photo shows that it is irregularly shaped like a canvas sack stuffed to make it round. And to simulate this, I'm going to use tissue paper. I'll cut out a piece using this template. I'll form it around the ball with some watered down Mod Podge. When done, it will keep a cloth-like appearance that I'll paint dark brown. Why was there a ball on a pole? The observatory kept the official time for Rome, and each day determined solar noon. At that hour, the ball would be dropped, much like the New Year's ball in Times Square. Observers at Castel Sant'Angelo would see the ball drop and would fire a cannon to announce midday to the entire city. And today the cannon is still fired, but from the Janiculum Hill in Trastevere. A thin piece of wire will simulate the cable that was used to raise and lower the ball on the pole. A small piece cut from a slightly larger stick will be used to cap the pole. And it fits perfectly into the slot I made for it so many months ago. Thanks again, Past-Me! We're getting down to some final touches. On the facade, there's a plaque with the IHS logo for the Most Holy Name of Jesus. Rather than trying to draw it myself, I printed out a tiny photo of the actual thing and I'm pasting it to a piece of styrene. So once it's trimmed, it looks very nice. And it will be glued into place on the facade. And no church would be complete without a cross. In this case, the cross is ironwork on a stone plinth. For the ironwork, I'm using more of that silver jeweler's wire. I created a jig to form the cross, and I'm using pliers to work the wire into shape. It's a little tricky to remove it without ruining all the work, but it came out okay. I just had to make a few small adjustments once it came off. There are 4 bars holding it onto the plinth, so to add 2 more, Blurry Cam is helping me solder on another wire. And once attached, it gets folded down and crimped tight. Now they all get trimmed to length. I'm painting it metallic gray, and yes, I know I should have primed it first. One of these days I will learn to do that. And after painting, it gets darkened by soaking in a dark wash. Attaching it to the plinth is a bit tricky, especially when you can't keep it in focus. We must be close to finish with this project because now I'm reattaching the finials to the top of the facade. Une pièce de résistance. But wait, there's more. We need to put on a few antennae. This one was probably attached to a weather instrument since it gets placed above Secchi's terrestrial magnetism laboratory. And this piece was probably a lightning rod. And for some final touches, a few Jesuit astronomers for scale. I'll put it here. No, here. It's better over here. Or maybe here. No, right there. That's better. And of course, somebody needs to be operating the telescope. Who is this guy waiting for? Why, this gold-trimmed carriage and its 2 horsies, of course. Last but not least, I'll put a plaque on the side. And now it is done! Wow, it is finally finished. This project took several months to put together, and it is probably the biggest and most complex model I have constructed to date. Is it perfect? No, not by a long shot. There are several details in here that are just not quite right. The color isn't perfect. There's so many little things that if I had the chance to do it again, I probably would. But that's not the point. The point is, this is a learning experience. I am working with materials and some techniques that I'd never worked with before in making this. And in the end, I'm actually quite happy with how this turned out. I would like to be able to do something of the same quality as Luke Towan or Laser Creation World or one of those other YouTube channels, but this is actually very good. There are several lessons that I think I learned in the process of doing this. One of them, for certain, is I have to start with detailed plans. I need to know measurements. I was really working off the cuff, and several of the measurements are just not right here. And that was the first mistake. If you get the measurements wrong, a lot of other things just don't quite work out. On the other hand, if I waited until I had everything worked out, I probably never would have even started this project. So in many ways, I learned what I needed to know as I was working on it. As I realized I need to figure out how these pieces fit together before I can fit them together. If I had the chance to do this again, the next result would be much better than it is. But as it is, it's really good. I would say, in fact, it's museum quality. And when I say that, I'm not just speaking in platitudes. We are in the pontifical villas at Castel Gandolfo, Italy, in a building that houses two of our historic telescopes, the Carte du Ciel, which is directly upstairs, and the Schmidt telescope, which is on the other side of the building. Now, we've converted this place into a visitor center and museum that shows off the history and the current activities of the Vatican Observatory. Now, here in this room, we display some of the early history of the observatory, including previous observatories sponsored by the papacy. So Angelo Secchi and the Observatory of the Roman College feature quite prominently here. And so this model really fits nicely in this space, and it has now become part of the exhibit. So if you ever find yourself in Castel Gandolfo, you can arrange for a visit to see it for yourself. And as an additional note, I just want to point out that there are people who are connected with the Church of St. Ignatius who have seen this model and have expressed an interest in putting it on temporary exhibit there. Now, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but if so, it would be seen by thousands of people, and I'm really excited about that possibility. So that's all that I have for you today and for this project. I've got several more projects in the pipeline, and so there should be new videos coming out real soon. Until then, I'll see you later. I hope you enjoyed this project. If so, please like and subscribe and click that bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. Now, this video is not sponsored by the Vatican Observatory, but for full disclosure, I should mention that I do make use of their facilities and resources. However, the materials and tools come out of my own personal budget. The purpose of the Vatican Observatory is to be a sign to the world of the compatibility of faith and science, and it could use your support. If you'd like to support the work at the Vatican Observatory, or even just learn a little bit more about it, there's a link in the description below. Thank you.